the end. So tonight, our speaker is Ruskin Hartley, and Ruskin is works with the International Dark Sky Association, which I'm sure some of you know has its international office located in Tucson. We're very happy about that. And Ruskin has done a lot of conservation work in his career, and is doing some really industrious work with the International Dark Sky Association, and is going to both tell you some things about that association and also tell you some things about protecting dark skies. So Ruskin?
Let me just do this.
Great.
Is that working? Let's just
yes.
the technology right. So 2 years ago, I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. Had only been to Tucson once at the time and had never really thought about dark skies. I just had come to know the International Dark Sky Association through a job posting they put in. And one night in November, I was driving my oldest son here, Rowan, who I think he was 10 at the time, back from soccer practice, kind of as the night was falling, and he was kind of dozing off in the front seat. And he asked a question that I think in many ways kind of helped shape the course of my career. We're coming nearer home, and he said, "Hey, Dad, this weekend, can we get some old movies to watch?" I said, "Sure, Rowan. Why?" So, as you said, my name's Ruskin Hartley, and it's my great pleasure for the last better part of 2 years to have been running the International Dark Sky Association as their executive director. I wanted to talk a little bit about this work, and I'm kind of embarrassed to be doing it because, as we'll get later, actually one of the co-founders is with us today. So Tim, if you're listening, you have to keep me honest if I go off the rails anytime, so thank you. The International Dark Sky Association, it's pretty simple what we do. We're all about protecting the night from light pollution. We're trying to do that around the world. And I should start off by saying that the story I've heard is we are the International Dark Sky Association because the co-founders didn't want it to be the Dark Sky Association, which the acronym would have been DA, which wasn't very catchy. So it became the International Dark Sky Association. I want to cover three things this evening. A little bit about what is light pollution. Importantly, why care about it? And also how can I and how can you help solve it? I wanted to start with this slide to say, when you're dealing with light pollution, this is really what we're always up against. It's, I'm talking with a bunch of astronomers this evening, and you're probably not fond of the dark, but for a lot of people out there, there's an innate sense of the dark is something to be frightened of. And in fact, the reverse is true. We are drawn to light. It's hard to tell whether this woman watching her phone in the evening is happy because of what she's reading or is happy just because she's being bathed in light. Light makes us feel happy. Here's a beautiful blue sky day. You can tell it's not in Tucson because of the green grass there. Now, if I just drop the image quality there, our mood starts to change. We feel differently about an image that looks like that. But what is light pollution? So many of us are familiar with, certainly in the conservation movement, talking about air pollution and water pollution, and now more and more people are talking about ocean pollution, all that plastic in the ocean. But what is light pollution? Many people have not heard about it. In fact, I was, case in point, I'd worked in conservation for 20 years, and I don't think I'd come across it more than once or twice, and I certainly hadn't thought about it as an issue that I should be focused on as a professional conservationist. I wanted to start with this slide and kind of say, can you notice anything? Some of you might have seen this image before. IDA's been using it for many years. There's this sense, this perception that more light makes us more safe. And as many of you know, the reality is anything but. The reality is more light does not make us safe. In fact, well-designed lighting make us safe. You can see as we hold up our hand against that glary fixture there's, I think it was probably Jim Beignet or someone like that, kind of hiding in plain sight. We like to say hiding in the shadows. When we think about light pollution, we really think about three aspects of it. And I wanted to start with glare. If we're all together, I'd say in person, I'd say by show of hands, who likes those, if you're driving down the street at night, who likes those high intensity, bright blue, glary lights that shine in your head. I've yet to be in a room where someone said, yeah, I like those. Glare, people hate glare. Makes us feel uncomfortable. But it's not just glare. We also talk about trespass, light trespass. That's really, you see these buildings. This is a picture I took in DC. And certainly the first few stories, those buildings are illuminated. That light is meant to be illuminating the road, but it's going off into people's windows. So we talk a lot about light trespass. It's that neighbor's light that's shining in your yard at night that's annoying you. And ultimately, the net result of all these millions of light bulbs out there is something that I'm sure all of you are familiar with, which is sky glow. And that's why your Tucson, was why you have the Chiricahua Astronomy Center is out, hours from Tucson, as opposed to here on the outskirts of Tucson. It's the net result of all that is creates this sky glow, and that's really the impact that many astronomers feel most acutely. I just wanted to share, I won't spend a lot of time on this slide saying, putting it all together. Light pollution is wasted light. This is a light, and let me pull out my laser pointer. This is the light. It's designed to illuminate this surface here. Anything else is pollution. Anything else is pure and utter waste. Whether it's shining in someone's light, in someone's room, whether it's going up into the sky, it's waste. And we like to say that light pollution is a pollutant in exactly the same way that air and water is pollutant. Something that we should all care about whether we know or not. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this. I'm going to spend mostly talking about light pollution, but I did want to mention some new threats to the night sky that we're seeing. Oil and gas flaring, actually with the kind of decline in the economy, that's less of a problem at the moment, but it will certainly come back. We are seeing greenhouses. This is a shot taken, I believe, up in northern Arizona about a year ago, these greenhouses, and this is the UV glow coming out of those, that eerie purple light. We're getting more and more calls in the office that, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I'm sure many of you, or probably most of you, have seen the sort of satellite mega constellations and the impact that has on your imaging, your observing, and really ultimately our relationship to the night sky. I want to start off by talking a little bit about why care. Why care about this issue? Light pollution affects us all, whether we know it or not. And now for this crowd, clearly one reason to care is it's our access to your hobby and some of your professions, and just that connection we have to the universe, that the largest part of nature is in fact not on Earth. And we are literally throwing a veil over that because of light pollution. We're losing the ability to see the sky in many places. But I think our challenge as a community is to take this beyond the astronomy community. And this is what I was touching on, like IGA was founded in Tucson by an amateur astronomer and a professional astronomer who came together. One, Tim is on the call today, and the other, Dave Crawford, now lives in San Diego. And it was really born out of a belief that, like, I think, Tim wanted to be able to use his telescope to observe, and he was concerned about the lights that were going in the hospital that he was working about. So it came out of the astronomy community, and we are firmly rooted in the astronomy community, and we're proud of that relationship. But I'm here to say, like, if we leave it to the astronomy community to solve it, we are going to lose the battle. The challenge for all of us is to extend into new communities who also care about this issue, whether they know it or not. One kind of ecosystem discussion, many of us love, one of the great pleasures of living down here in Tucson is the connection we have to nature and the desert, and the incredible life in the Sonoran Desert. And light pollution disrupts every living thing that's ever been studied. And just a few examples, birds, half of the birds in North America migrate at night. Millions of them each year get blown off course by the sky glow emanating from cities like Chicago, Houston, Dallas, and millions of birds die each year. We're learning more and more about predator-prey interactions, like between deer and mountain lions in the face of light pollution. For those of you who have children or grandchildren have seen Finding Nemo, the little clownfish will not reproduce under artificial light. Beetles, the dung beetle navigates by the Milky Way. This is a depiction of coral. Under artificial light, many species of coral disrupts their reproductive cycle So the coral cannot reproduce under artificial lights. It's just all out of whack because they're used to growing up under moonlight. The list goes on and on and on. More and more, we're learning that light levels as low as 1 lux, which is very, very limited amount of light, starts to lead to disruption of the ecosystem. There's also the heritage aspect of this. I believe Chaco Canyon. It's like people have told their stories in the sky. There was a paper published earlier this year saying light pollution really is a form of cultural genocide. We're robbing people of their connection to the sky. We're losing that connection to our ancestors and to the places that we told those stories. But there's also a flip side to protecting places against light pollution in terms of economic development. More and more communities are finding that if you protect your dark skies, people will want to come and visit them. This is a photo that was taken recently in Moab, and under canvas, some of you might have known that they had an operation here on the outskirts of Tucson briefly last year. I was talking with their leadership earlier this year, and they're saying the fastest growing sector of the tourism community is nature-based tourism. And a lot of people are going to look for places where they can be out under a naturally dark sky, and they're seeing real growth and real interest around the US, and in fact around the world, about the economic aspects, particularly for rural communities, of protecting the sky above, not just protecting the land beneath your feet. And then there's just the plain dollars and cents. Wasted light is wasted money. We estimate this number's a little old now. $3 to $7 billion a year are wasted in the US alone on outdoor lighting that's going places that it's not needed. By some estimates, that's 21 million tons of carbon dioxide being pumped into the atmosphere. So anyone who cares about climate change should care about wasted light, and any city should clearly care about putting the light where it's needed. I wanted to touch just very briefly on the current status around the world, what we know about what's going on. This is the 2016 seminal study that came out from Fabio Falci and others, where they looked at really in detail for the first time about the status of light pollution on the ground around the world by matching up remotely sensed images with what's going on. So you can see here, the dark areas are dark. The good news is, by some estimates, 85% of the planet is still naturally dark. That's great. You can see basically light tracks economic activity, it tracks people, and you can see where the bright spots are there. Critically, we estimate it's growing at 2% globally, 2% annual growth rate of 2% per year on a global basis. Some areas are growing at maybe 10%, some are tracking population, but that trend is an extremely worrying one. It's about twice the rate.
When we have the general meeting part, the members only is whatever they call it.
99% of people in North America and Europe, we estimate, live under a polluted sky, and 80% can no longer see the Milky Way from their home. I live on the outskirts of Tucson. I feel very fortunate. Live out by Saguaro East National Park, and I'm one of the rare people that if it's a dark night and I'm looking in the right direction, I can still see the Milky Way from my driveway. But that's rare. That's an unusual occurrence. The vast majority of people growing up today have no connection to the night sky. And most worryingly, they don't know they're missing anything. Just think about it. They don't know they're missing anything. This, I want to zoom in just briefly to the US. This is, I'm sure, again, familiar to you. You could probably explain it better than I. This is the sort of Bortle scale, and where I'm sure where you want to be as an astronomer or anyone who loves the night sky is out here at the right end of the scale under a truly excellent dark sky site. Most people live out here. Most people now live in cities and suburban skies. I probably live in one of these transitional skies. So if you look at that, in the US, you can see kind of this classic pattern of the East versus the West. The West is naturally dark, primarily because of the presence of so much public land. But you can see even in the West, this is the light dome of Las Vegas. Las Vegas can be seen from the Grand Canyon, the light dome. This is us down here in Tucson in southern Arizona. And I'm sure when you go out observing your sites, you want to be out here in the Chiricahuas where it's naturally dark. And the question is like, what's it mean to travel all that time to go to a naturally dark site? And is that the future for all of us? Because As population grows and as we continue with transitioning to new technologies, the projections is these light areas are going to continue to expand unless we change the way we're doing things. Now, fortunately, light pollution has a simple solution. I have worked on forest conservation, on ocean conservation. I can tell you, working on ocean conservation, you're dealing with plastics in the ocean. People have no idea how to remove that stuff. You're working with forest conservation. I worked with redwoods. Once the forest is cut down, it's going to take hundreds or thousands of years to recover. The wonderful thing about light pollution is once you solve it, it's solved at the speed of light. It goes away. We like to say that light pollution has a simple solution, and it's really about community-friendly lighting. It's about dark skies. It's not about dark ground. I wanted to share a couple examples at different scales. So earlier this year, we kind of codified a set of lighting principles jointly with an industry group called the Illuminating Engineering Society here in North America to come up with some principles about how you should think about using light. And if you follow these 5 principles, you should have good outcomes. So the first is all light should have a purpose. It should be useful. Don't shine it in the sky. Don't shine it in your neighbor's yard. The second is it should be placed where you need it. It should be targeted at the locations that you need it. And again, this is, we like to say, it's about pointing it down at the ground. There is chronic overlighting in the world. And that is, I think, one of the new frontiers for IDA in the overall movement. Our eyes are incredibly sensitive. They are incredibly adaptive. If you take light levels and you drop it down 30%, your eyes won't notice the difference. You will not notice the difference, but you're using less light, so there's less pollution coming. So you have to think about dropping the light levels down. A new frontier for this movement is about controls. And this is, imagine a parking lot. No, parking lots don't need to have lights on at 2 a.m. blasting out, hundreds and thousands of lumens if no one's there. Now with modern technology, you can drop them down to a very low level. If a car pulls up, they can pop back up. People can feel safer. Once they've gone, they go back down. So that's a real exciting frontier for this work. And we can talk maybe in the Q&A about color, but humans grew up around the campfire. Those warm, rich amber lights are warming and comforting, and they lead to less pollution. The bright, glary, blue-white lights are the ones that we should really be concerned about. They're most disruptive of human health. They're most disruptive of wildlife. And critically, from a SkyCo perspective, they're a total disaster. So here's one example that I saw up in Denver, in the Denver area earlier this year, just before lockdown. And this shows how when you bring these principles together, you can have a great outcome. So the one on the light, this is, imagine a cul-de-sac with homes around it and a pathway. So the one on the light was the old ones. Those are 450 lumen lights, so pretty low intensity light bulbs, but they weren't shielded. They were blasting everywhere. And on the right is the solution that was developed afterwards. They put a little cap on, again, same number of lumens being put out, but you can see the difference here. When you measure it, we don't have to get into what the units mean, but basically the bright bit in the middle here, that's 10,000 candela. That will start to hurt your eyes. Look how much is going on the ground. Very little of the light is going on the ground. Now, look what happened afterwards. The same 450 lumens, the glare component has dropped way down. And actually now we're putting more light on the ground where we need it. So same light bulb, different application, vastly different outcome. So again, I want to break down this perception that dark sky lighting is poor lighting. Dark sky lighting is quality lighting. So that's an example at a neighborhood scale. We are really excited about the work that Tucson has been doing in this area over the last few years. And Tucson continues to lead in this space and demonstrate for a large city. Tucson's 500,000 people in the city itself. And critically, they're very conscious. They want to be a good neighbor for the astronomers up at Kitt Peak and Mount Graham and other places, because it's such an important part of the economy in this area. So a number of years ago, like many cities, Tucson decided it wanted to retrofit and upgrade change its lights out. It wanted to be responsible. It wanted to use less energy by changing out from old high pressure sodium lights to new modern light emitting diodes. Importantly, when they went into this, they not only said we want to save money, but we want to make sure we manage sky glow. We don't want to increase sky glow as a result of that. In fact, if we can, we want to reduce it. Just ballpark, we know from a DOE study from a number of years ago, if you take an old Cobra head light fixture with a high pressure sodium light and you replace it with a 3000 Kelvin LED light that is common around Tucson, you have to do two things to manage light pollution. One is you have to make sure you have no uplight. The old Cobras had quite a lot of uplight. LEDs are wonderful that you can have zero uplight. You put all the light on the ground. The second thing you have to do, and many cities miss this, you have to reduce the total number of lumens you're putting out there. You have to drop them by about a half, which is great. You actually have even more energy savings. So Tucson did this. They replaced the better part of 20,000 roadway luminaires, 1.6 million watts, I believe, of power were put out there, something like 180 million lumens being put out there. So what did they achieve as a result of this? After they did a couple of things, they put them in, they dropped the levels, and they also put a control system in place. And in fact, if you're out and about observing, or maybe out and about in Tucson, after midnight, the light levels drop, I think, down to 60%, and no one has noticed. No one's really noticed. So what was the outcome? They are putting out 63% reduction in lumens. That's the total amount of light that's being put out there. Critically, we talk a lot about the short wavelength emissions. Those are the bluer emissions that are most disruptive of wildlife and most harmful for sky grow. They reduced the total quantity of blue light by 34%. And they saved $2.1 million a year in energy savings that help pay for the cost of the project. So all around, by thinking about it thoughtfully, they had a great outcome. Subsequent to this, what we have learned in a recent study that my colleague was an author on is now streetlights are maybe a third of the light pollution in Tucson. The other sources are the ones we now have to be worried about. Those are residential lots, commercial lighting, electronic messaging centers, electronic billboards, sports lighting. Those are becoming more and more important component of light pollution in cities like Tucson once you've dealt with your street lighting. I promised to talk a little bit about the global reach, and I wanted to move there briefly. IDA's signature program is protecting dark sky places through our International Dark Sky Places program. We now protect and recognize the management practices of over 100,000 square kilometers on every continent apart from Antarctica. I'm pretty excited about that. Those dark sky places, places like Grand Canyon National Park, places like Oracle State Park just north of us, they saw 95 million visitors in 2019. That's a lot of people being exposed to dark sky messaging and quality lighting. And from initial start in Tucson, 32 years ago, I think it was, we now have a footprint and a presence in 32 countries around the world, which is exciting. To show you some of those places, just give you a brief snapshot. In Greece, our chapter there delivered information about light pollution to all elected officials. In South Africa, we established the second international dark sky park on the continent and have a growing advocacy community there. Argentina, we now have some delegates in Argentina starting to work on light pollution issues in that country. Mexico passed a groundbreaking national law on light pollution that recognized light as an environmental pollutant that will now figure out how they will operationalize that at the state level. I promised I'd mention Tokyo. The prefecture of Tokyo is really close to having a dark sky park established within its boundaries. It's actually an island reserve, about a 50-minute or so ride from Tokyo. That is kind of the playground for people going out of Tokyo. So that will expose people in one of the most light polluted cities in the world to dark places and what the responsible use of light is. And Pitcairn Island became one of the first island nations to be established as a dark sky reserve. So you can see we have this growing global footprint and this growing global awareness. And I think what's happening, particularly with COVID over the last 6 or 7 months, people have been sat at home and they've started to look up, and some of them say, well, I thought there would be stars up there, and why are they missing? And others have looked up, and with the reduction of air pollution and reduction in economic activity, they're seeing the stars for the first time, and we want to capitalize on that so we can continue to grow this movement. I wanted to close by just briefly sharing our new set of strategic priorities for IDA that are really going to guide our work over the next decade. And the first one is an area that I think all of you can really help in. We want people to celebrate the night. We need people to feel more comfortable that the night is a place that they can feel safe. We want to have awareness of light pollution reaching a tipping point, so more people are moving from awareness to action on every continent. We really believe it starts with that people protect things that they love. If they love it, they'll want to see it protected and preserved. We will continue our work to protect dark places, and there's this growing movement to kind of really set aside large portions of the earth for nature. And we want to make sure that light pollution, the dark sky movement, is part of that dialogue and that conversation. There's a growing movement to say, look, we need to protect at least 30% of the planet for nature. E.O. Wilson says half, 50%, which I'm all about that. And we want to make sure that people are thinking about light pollution there. But these dark places, that's not where light pollution is coming from. So more and more, we have to be moving into cities and communities. And we're calling that our program kind of Lighting Where We Live. And Tucson's a great example of that. You know, we need strong enforceable light pollution laws in every city, region, and county. And we need these place-based examples. We need examples we can point to like Tucson. Hey, they dealt with it. It's still a vibrant community. People still feel safe, and they're taking care of the nighttime environment. And when we put that all together, we believe that that inexorable increase in light pollution going up 2% a year is not inevitable. It is not an inevitable outcome of growth and economic activity. We believe, and it's just a belief at this point, we need to have place-based demonstrations that we can actually start to restore the nighttime environment. So that I'm friends with, David Rossiter's on the call, and he invited me to join and speak, and so that people like David with his telescope out on the east side of Tucson have access to better skies, and so that our kids and grandkids who are growing up in these cities and communities can look up and see the skies. That's where we want to get. So I want to bring it back to where I started, and my son, remember his question? Dad, can we watch some old movies? No, sure. I asked, but why? And he said something to me that was really profound, that stuck with me. He said, because I want to know what the stars look like. And my commitment is like, I don't want kids growing up to have to go back to an old movie to see what the night sky looked like. And that thought kind of stuck with me as I started talking more deeply with IDA about joining the organization, and was very fortunate to have the opportunity to come on board to help lead this work. And now, on a dark night in Tucson, we can go outside and we can enjoy the bats and the owls and, of course, the stars overhead. I wanted to extend an open invitation to all of you and everyone who's watching to join us next weekend, if you don't have too much Zoom fatigue, for our first truly global conference. In 2020, November 13th and 14th, our Under One Sky conference is convening. We're going to convene over a 24-hour period, starting about 1 o'clock here in Tucson, and then we're going to have regional breakout sessions in Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and in Europe, and then in the Americas, to bring people together to talk about these issues. We've invited a dozen speakers to come in and tell their stories from very diverse perspectives in terms of why light pollution, why dark skies matters, and why we should all come together to protect the night from light pollution. So you can register at conference.darksky.org. It's free, and I encourage everyone to come and join. And I'd also encourage, we're a member-based organization, as is Tucson Astronomy Society. I'd encourage all of you to consider either extending your membership or becoming a member. It's through the support of individuals like you all over the world that we're able to do this work. And this, just to leave people, this is a picture of Flagstaff, and Flagstaff up in northern Arizona is really is a shining example of how you can get it right, and then a community that's truly embraced dark sky protection as part of their reason for being. And yes, if you live in parts of Tucson, you can look up and you can still see the star. But it's parts of Flagstaff, you can look up and still see the stars. So thank you, May. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you, David, for inviting, and thank you, Tim, for setting us off down this path. And it's been a pleasure to pick it up and an honor to carry it forward. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Ruskin. We're going to check in a minute to see if there are questions for you. Ruskin will be available, as our members know, for a breakout session after this. And if you've not put in the chat your choice for breakout sessions for Jim, please do so. And that was either meeting with Ruskin, imaging, observing, or a TAAA discussion. So you can put those choices in if you have not done that. But now I want to go back to Ruskin, and I don't have questions in my chat for you right now, but I wonder if our Facebook people had any questions. Terry, did we have comments or questions from Facebook? No? Okay, so do we have any other questions for Ruskin at this point in time? I know some of you are looking forward to meeting with him afterwards, but if you have other general questions. Okay, there was a request that we have the conference address again. So could you read over there?
Yeah, you can go to our main webpage, which is darksky.org, darksky.org, and there's a link right on the homepage. And that will take you to conference.darksky.org. But right on the homepage, the banner, there's a link to register. Registration's free, but we just ask that you do it in advance. So it would be great to see many of you online.
So, and do you know what kind of presentations we might have at the conference?
Yeah, the keynote on Friday afternoon is an incredible woman called Dr. Annette Lee. She is a professional, she's an educator. And she descends from 2 native tribes in the US, and she has been using traditional knowledge to help teach astronomy. She talks about seeing with 2 eyes, looking at both the traditional sort of Western science culture and also how you can blend that in with traditional knowledge. So she's going to launch us. We have speakers from, there's an individual from Australia who's going to be speaking about the different Aboriginal stories about the Southern Cross. We have a wonderful astrophotographer in China who has been to the far reaches of the country and has been taking pictures there. We have a great delegate from Hong Kong, a wonderful woman from Serbia who's been talking about her work there. We got speakers from Nicaragua and Costa Rica. So you're going to get a real rich perspective. There will only be one speaker from the US. We really wanted to make sure that we were showing the strength of this movement, and I can see Tim there. That is the putting the I in IDA, and we wanted to really showcase those different voices and really encourage people to think about, like, you might know it from an astronomy perspective. How are you going to reach out to other people who might not care about astronomy but care about something else? So that's really the challenge of this conversation.
Super. Okay, we had a question from Dean who said you mentioned LBT atop Graham. The brightest light source there is Fort Grant Prison at the base of the mountain. Has there been any attempt to keep the prison from lighting the inside of the enclosure?
You know, there's one interesting things about IDA. Our strength comes from our local chapter, so a lot of the work happens from the locals on the ground. What I can, so I'm not familiar with the specifics of that. What I can tell you about Mount Graham is, I mentioned sports lighting earlier. So one of the growth areas in the US is outdoor sports lighting. People want to recreate at night, particularly here in Southern Arizona where it's so hot. You want your kids to be playing out when it's cool at night. So one of the first really great examples of a well-done sports field actually came about as a result of Mount Graham. One of the new fields out in Green Valley in Suarito was by one of our local lighting engineers, Chris Monrad. And when he was designing that, he had in mind, he didn't want to annoy the astronomers up at Mount Graham, but he knew one way he could do that is to make sure he's taking care of the neighbors in the community opposite. So he designed a set of fields that have then informed a standard that we have. And it's that type of standard that if it was applied to some place like that prison yard would actually lead to a good outcome.
Okay, we had a request. If you would, please comment on the recent billboard lighting issue in Tucson.
Yeah, so this issue is, these are electronic billboards. So traditional billboards, someone goes out and rolls out some newsprint or something like that, right? And some of them were lit, some of them were lit terribly. They were lit from the bottom and those lights went right into the night sky. The new technology now is to convert these to electronic messaging centers, electronic messaging displays, I believe they call them in Tucson. These are very problematic. When done well, they potentially can be part of a solution, but very often they can be part of the problem because these are lit internally using LEDs often, and the light is going out at that horrendous angle that is most contributed to sky glow. So there has been a moratorium in large parts of Arizona particularly to protect the astronomy centers. And I'd say that the billboard industry is, it's money for them, it's their business. And so they have been effective advocates for their business. And unfortunately, at the recent planning commission, they decided to, the planning commissioners, I believe, even overrode the staff recommendation to not expand the use of electronic messaging displays here in Tucson. Now, that will have to be constantly vigilant around that. And IDA does have some guidelines, like if the community is going to put in place, convert maybe an old billboard with some uplight into a new billboard with electronic messaging display, there are some guidelines that we put in place about the brightness and how they can be dimmed. The challenge of that just deals with the individual billboards. Maybe one conversion. So what we really need to be thinking about is the total number of billboards. So each billboard, how much additional light has been put into the sky as a result. So I think that's an area that we look for all of you and our advocates here to continue to watch and advocate to the city council that we want to protect our dark skies.
May, can I mention something on that?
Okay.
IDA, of course, was a big part in trying to get that stopped, but the TAAA wrote a very nice letter, and several other people wrote letters to the County Board of Commissioners opposing these proposed changes, which the excuse for the changes was that there was a Supreme Court ruling about billboards, not specifically you have to have lights, but allowing more freedom for the billboard owners. And so the staff of the county thought that we ought to update the code, which might get more conform to law and clean up a bunch of parts of it that were inconsistent and outdated. In the process, they allow loopholes for the electronic messaging centers. These may be giant billboards, but they also may just be small little things outside a store and going on during the day. And it was going to be pretty much unregulated as far as I could tell. And so a number of people, and one of the biggest people that opposed this was the TAAA. And Jim and yourself, and I think that helped tremendously. So I'm hoping we can keep a lid on that.
Yeah, no, that's well said, Tim.
Yes, thank you very much, Tim. Another question was, I heard the US uses more electricity on Christmas lights than some countries use in a whole year. What can we do about Christmas lights?
This is always an interesting one. I mean, there certainly is, every year we get questions on this. Every year you can see some communities pop up and get brighter during the Christmas period. Unfortunately, this year, I think Summer Haven, I just heard, had canceled their Christmas display. So we won't have that problem in Summer Haven. I mean, it is always a challenging one. I mean, we look at the totality of this. So if Christmas lights are just used for 30 or 40 days during Christmas and they're turned off at midnight or turned off at 10 or 11, then it's not a big part of the problem compared to electronic message centers or car dealerships that are still growing at full bore at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I think this is one, it's like, yes, it's part of it. But if you look at the totality of the problem around the year, I think that what it does suggest is like maybe the bigger issue, there used to be Christmas lights. And now, now you've got your Halloween lights and your Christmas lights and your your Valentine's lights, and it's what we're doing is, because light has got so cheap and it's so easy to install it, we are starting to light more of our outdoor spaces. I was talking with a woman who runs one of the large collaborations out of the East Coast, and that's one of the trends that they're seeing is parks used to be dark at night, and now people are lighting them. Our backyards used to be dark at night, and now we're lighting them. So I think that's the bigger challenge. As light gets cheaper and easier to install, what's to stop us from doing it? And I think that's where it comes into, like, that's why we want communities who really embrace and understand the value of protecting dark skies, not just for the astronomer. The astronomer, most of you probably don't observe, and you probably live in Tucson, but you don't observe here, or you live in a city and you observe elsewhere. So in a sense, why does it matter for the astronomy community? We have to figure out how it matters for everyone else, from a public health perspective, from a wildlife perspective, and yes, ultimately from an energy perspective.
Another question. Our neighborhood in Midtown requires every home to have 2 lights on the garage. It makes observing nearly impossible from my house. How could I approach the neighborhood association about solutions to this?
I'm kind of laughing, and Tim Hunter can chime in afterwards about what he discovered about the house that his daughter built. But the HOAs can be pretty powerful, and I think it really is. It comes to neighbor talking to neighbor. We have some good guidelines for HOA, homeowner associations, lightings that would make them more dark sky friendly. So I think again, it's really what some of our advocates has found is, like, hold a block party and talk about the issue. Don't make it about just one neighbor. Make it about the community. If it is just one neighbor who's shining their light on you, maybe talk with everyone and offer to change out their lights for them. So yeah, I know these neighbor to neighbor conversations are difficult. I actually think it probably is easier in the context of a neighbor association. But again, it starts with, like, showing people what's being lost. And it's probably not just you're observing. There are probably other people. Figure out what would motivate other people to want to either dim those or shield them, or turn them off after midnight, or whatever the right solution is. And once you build that consensus, then at least with an HOA, you can put it into the CC&Rs and actually get it enforced.
You suppose the local IDA has any people who might want to come talk to a homeowners association?
We can certainly ask them, but I think, the trick there, and then Tim, you should definitely chime in. We would much prefer that we have some resources on our website about this, rather than bringing in an outside person to talk about why you should do it. It's really great if it can be the community coming together about having that conversation.
I thought boring everybody. In fact, this is an article that's going to appear in the Reflector in a few months. Yeah. I happened to several years ago buy a lot just south of my house, in my neighborhood, mainly just I didn't want anybody to build there and sort of block my view. Was sort of off to the side. Well, it turns out the daughter and her husband decided to move from Phoenix to Tucson and have 2 small grandkids, and we actually gave them a lot, and they built a house in the lot. Very nice house. The builder, who I won't mention, is really a superb company. They really have done a beautiful job in the house. So one day I'm out in the backyard. It's kind of dark out, and I noticed these lights in the house. They hadn't moved in yet. I said, these are kind of bright. The lights by the front door and by the garage. So what's this about? So I walk over there a couple of days later, and these are nice fixtures, gorgeous fixtures of brass. They've got a lattice thing. They look beautiful during the day with a bare bulb hanging down. What the heck is this? So I was kind of irritated by it. And then about that time, they got permission to move in the house. There's a final inspection in the county. This is a county, but the city did the same thing. They declare a house livable, so the builder can turn it over to the owners. And they passed the inspection, but the inspector noted that the lights on the house weren't conforming to the light pollution law, but that was no big deal. It was kind of irritated me. So they got to move in, and she mentioned that to me. I said, well, Donna, that's true. And I said, why'd you pick those? Well, I like the looks during the day. So of course, this is an example. An awful lot of lights are put up because they look good during the day, not what they actually do at night. Well, I said, well, nothing, don't worry about it. I said, well, it's no big deal, because you don't have no reason to have lights on, except maybe you want to walk outside or somebody walks up. So they just go turn them off most of the time. Well, there's no switch. I said, what do you mean there's no switch? We can't turn them off. I said, what do you mean you can't turn them off? It's got to be a switch. No, there's no switch. I said, this is ridiculous. So they gave me the name of the actual owner of the building company. I called this gentleman up, and he was very nice, talked to me. He said, yeah, there's no switch there. I said, why is that? That's a county code. I said, what do you mean? This is, of course, it's not the county code. And then he comes in, then he starts thinking, we start discussing. Well, it turns out there is a county code for 911 for fire and police that the house or the residence has to have the residence number, the house number has to be clearly visible, not lit, but clearly visible. You could have the curb painted with your number on it. You could have the number on your mailbox. You could have a light sign in your yard. Well, this builder normally builds houses that are closer to the street, and this house that would be way set back from the street. And they decide they get around this by putting a light above the house number so that they meet this code requirement, and never thought about, should the light be on all night? And I said, why would you ever install a fixture that can never? I said, you're right. He says, as a matter of fact, in your daughter's case, it's 200 feet up. Nobody could ever see it from the street. And we put it in a mailbox for you, which is not lit, which is very nice numbers, easy to see. So he sent somebody out, and they actually redid the electrical system and put a switch in. So it's not going to be a convenient spot. We're going to start redesigning our houses because that was the design. So you've got to be, it's amazing that you put a design, you put a light in that you can't turn off. And I've heard people say this in the past. I said, well, that can't be true. Well, it may well be true. So that's something to keep track of. This is the kind of thing we have to be ever vigilant. It's just amazing.
Okay.
I think the message that it's done out of ignorance. It's not done out of malice. It's because people do not understand light pollution. They do not understand the impacts. And once they're gently educated about it, they'll often make the right changes. They'll make the right decisions.
So, Tim, I appreciate your contributions. And what I'd like to do is out you for people who don't know. For those of you who are here at this meeting and you don't know, Tim Hunter was speaking before, about his daughter's house. Tim was one of the co-founders of the International Dark Sky Association. And Tim's been a TAAA member for many, many, many years, and was before he and David Crawford came up with the idea for the Dark Sky Association that then got termed the International Dark Sky Association, and actually has become this fantastic international entity. But we are so proud of you, Tim, for all of your work that you've done on that. You've done so much work for TAAA over the years, and the last big thing Tim did was host our 65th anniversary event. But we appreciate you so much, Tim, and we're just so delighted that you and David did this and started this whole phenomenal movement. So thank you.
Thanks for your kind words. I would say that the organization IDA is way surpassed what I ever thought it could be, and I can't take any credit for it's in its current form. The people that are running it and the people that have run it in the last couple of decades have done a wonderful job. And I'm just hoping that it can continue to spread, and I wish Ruskin all the very best. I think he's doing a fantastic job. I love this decadal thing. I think one of the things we should try to do, and he's beginning this decadal plan, is to try to reverse some of the lighting problems in the suburban and urban areas. I asked Chris Luganville many years ago, a very famous astronomer and very good lighting engineer these days, if we could do everything perfect in the cities, could we see the Milky Way in the cities? He said, yes. If you only lit things that need to be lit, you had the proper lighting levels, you had good cutoff fixtures. If you stood in a park, let's say in downtown Chicago, not underneath this light, you should be able to look up and see the Milky Way. Wouldn't be like being out in the hinterland, but it would certainly be good. So we could, in theory, restore dark skies to cities. It's just going to take a long, long struggle. But I hope in our decadal plans we can do it. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. We have another question from David Rossiter, which is, how do we get the city to address obvious polluters such as car dealerships? It is difficult to even drive them as their light glare is blinding. Smart lighting can be a matter of safety as well as dark skies.
Yeah, this is thank you, David, for the difficult question. I mean, there's two aspects of this. So one is cities can pass policies that say you should do things. I mean, the city probably has a policy that says you should light levels to, recommended levels, by some industry group like IES, and we're working with IES to try and make sure that they're clear about those levels aren't like engineering guidelines. It's better to have 2 or 3 times that level. No, the level is the level, and the level is the level you should light to. So you can write that into code. The second bit is, how do you enforce that? And the enforcement piece, I'm just here to tell you, continues to be one of the most challenging aspects of working in the light pollution field. When there's this, where I start off, people assume that more light is safe. We're in a country where people don't like to be told what to do, and we have these type of outcomes. So I think we have to be working from the policy level down, and we also have to be working from the education level up. And so for a light dealer, if you're a car dealer, you're probably pretty driven by the bottom line and the economics. So maybe part of the dialogue with the car dealers is maybe we get some of the car dealer owners together and say, hey, look, let's do the analysis. Say, hey, if you all drop your levels, your cars are going to look as beautiful. And it'd be great if you could turn them off after 10 when your place is closed. But if you could all drop your levels, this is how much money you're going to be saving. And there's going to be no detriment to you. So I think that's kind of, when do we kind of try and do grassroots kind of encouragement, and when do we try and do the sort of top-down enforcement? And ultimately, the top-down enforcement will only work if we have an educated and informed community who wants to achieve those outcomes. I mean, I often hear in Tucson, oh, the skies are dark enough, light pollution is not an issue. But if you live in downtown Tucson, you can't see the Milky Way. And I live on the east side of town, and I can't see the stars as I look over west. So even in Tucson, we think we're doing good enough, but we could do an awful lot better if we came together and had that collective will. And really demonstrate, Tucson should become a dark sky community at some point, and really be, lean into that leadership and get to the place that Tim is describing, show that we can do this in a way that, yes, you can still see the stars, and the bats that we all love here aren't disrupted. And, the other thing Tucson's known for is its birding communities. You can look at the Doppler radar and you can see them being drawn into the light dome of Tucson. Well, that's not acceptable.
So how do we do something, or could we do something about enforcement? Just as in Tim's example, even the inspector said, well, that rule doesn't matter. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of enforcement in Tucson.
Yeah, again, I'm not intimately familiar with the Tucson Light Code, but I will just use an analogy on the enforcement. Before this is not related to dark sky, but I was actually a planning commissioner in a very small town in the Bay Area called Pinole. And we're like many small communities, the enforcement staff, they have no enforcement staff. They enforce when there's a complaint. And there was once an uptick. There'd been a whole bunch of enforcement around people having their trash cans out in front of their house too long. And they'd gone round based upon a complaint of a resident and slapped people over the wrists. And I'm sure the person who phoned in the complaint wasn't particularly, the most popular person in town anymore. But often, certainly in the US system, that's how enforcement happens. It happens when people know in the code and complaining, and then the city will respond. Now, obviously, what we want to get is that you don't have to get to that place. It's just the right thing to do. It just becomes an expectation that, yes, we're all in it together. And I just want to mention, like I mentioned, the International Dark Sky Places communities. IDA is known for our dark sky parks and reserves like the Grand Canyon. And we also have this designation of the International Dark Sky Community. And that is really a way that a community can come together and identify that, yes, it wants to do this, and have everyone kind of be moving in alignment to take all those necessary steps to really think responsibly about the use of light and bring people along.
Wonderful. That is the last question that I have from our members. I'm wondering if Terry has any other questions or comments from Facebook that have come in. So Terry, if you want to enter one in the chat for me, if there is. No, she doesn't. So it looks like that we've reached the end of our questions for now. And so Ruskin will excuse you as the presenter, but then of course we'll have you meeting with one of our 4 breakout groups, and so that will be wonderful. I want to say good night to our Facebook people, and thank you so much for attending and visiting with us tonight. We hope that you come back another time. Again, the first Friday of every month we will be meeting, and we also hope that you will consider at some point perhaps donating to Tucson Amateur Astronomy Association. This is one of the real ways that we keep our activities going. And of course, it's being much more difficult in COVID to receive donations than it usually is. And so we would appreciate any donations that you make. So thank you. And I'll say good night to our Facebook people for tonight.